All right. Well, then on the 25th of December, 1800, Talbot sold his commission for 5,000 guineas and came to Canada.
Yes, that was a pretty good price, I would think.
Yeah. Now, where did he go for those first couple of years he's here? There's a debate about where he was. He came here and he got land somewhere, and he started to...
I think he went to the Niagara Peninsula and he bought land there, or at least he acquired land there, about 1,500 acres. And he lived there for a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, 2 years anyway, and he didn't like it. And I think he went back to England and then got this immigration idea going with Lord Bathurst, who was in charge of the colonial office. He didn't like to deal with the local people in York. He was always at war with them, and they were always trying to put barriers in his way. So he just went back to England and said, there's an area up here, I want to start settling it. Give me the commission to do the settling, give me my military grant, and I'll go off and see what I can do. So that's what he did.
Well, now, what he envisaged here, this had something to do with him being a younger son and no chance of property in Britain. And what he felt, I suppose, was that some kind of land settlement scheme here would give him an opportunity to build up a big estate for himself.
Yes, he was encouraged by Simcoe in this because Simcoe had a great idea that the British aristocracy should establish feudal baronies in Canada, rather along the French system, a seigneurial system. And that was the way Canada, or British North America, was going to stay loyal to Britain and develop along the British lines. Talbot had a great pride in his lineage and his family, and he wanted to make a contribution to that in history. And so that's really there was really nothing else left for him. It was said that he was in love with King George III's daughter, Princess Charlotte, and that when he was turned down in that place because he didn't have enough money, he simply turned his back on the army and wanted to go out to the colonies.
Yeah. That seems also, there's certainly some kind of upset romantically with somebody, but then he also seemed to have turned against the licentiousness of that life of the aristocracy. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think that Regency England, if anyone knows anything about the art and history of Regency England, it was a profligate, if that's the correct word, era. We hadn't gone into the Victorian era, which of course was a reaction to Georgian England. Morals were certainly very loose.
And the King's sons really weren't very good examples, were they?
Well, no, the King's sons had a pretty good time. Yeah. Although the Duke of York was one of them, and he was a fine military figure.
No, he was all right, but I think of Prinny, the oldest son, who pretty disreputable character, wasn't he?
Yes, well, we don't want to get involved in any libel suits here, George.
Well, he's dead, thank goodness. Well, so anyway, Talbot came here, and he really, it didn't that he didn't bring a lot of servants with him. He was capable of really being a pioneer himself, wasn't he?
Yes, I think that that certainly is one quality that seems to stand out in anyone who met him on these expeditions, that he really was a woodsman and loved to go out and chop down trees. And he liked to cook, actually. He did all the cooking in his camp for his men. When he landed at Port Talbot in 1803, I think there were 4 other men with him. And they stayed with him for a few years, and then they got land, and they were off on their own. But yes, he was certainly, he liked the frontier.
Yep.
And he wanted to turn his back on the rather artificial life of the court.
And I suppose that as well as the artificial life, whatever romantic attachment it was, and there are half a dozen different stories of who it might have been, also contributed to it. No, he started in 1803, and he had a grant for 5,000 acres of land, and he was supposed to bring out settlers and give them 50 acres. He was to get 200 acres. Now, by 1808, he's only established 20 settlers.
Mm-hmm.
And,
of course, that was an era of conflict in Europe. The Napoleonic Wars were in full swing. Armies had not been disbanded, and there wasn't really a lot of demand for settlement. It wasn't until after Waterloo, and then, of course, in the 1830s, when the great land hunger hit Ireland and Scotland, and the land clearances were done. When the landlords just literally loaded all the tenants up on boats and sent them out to the New World.
Now, Talbot did have a couple of plans. You have to realize he settled in, let's show that picture of the lakefront there. Yeah, let's show that. That's what, really the lake shore, when Talbot settled in 1803, hasn't really changed very much. This is a modern picture of Malahide Farms.
Yes, it's...
But the lake shore at that time, well, if you look at it now,
can you pick it up?
I know we're having a problem getting this picture on.
Yes, Port Talbot was never developed. I think probably the river was a little bit too small. It's a little smaller than Kettle Creek, and Colonel Talbot himself didn't like to have people around him. He didn't want a lot of people encroaching on him. Yes, this is the lake, and of course the lake was the great highway of the early days of the pioneer era. The pioneer era really corresponds, in this area, corresponds to Colonel Talbot's tenure of this area from 1803 to 1853 when he died, that 50-year period. The lake was the highway. Schooners plowed up and down it, and they dropped people off. They dropped people off at Port Talbot, right on the beach here, right at the mouth of the Talbot Creek. And of course, they had to climb up the hill and wait for Colonel Talbot to interview them and see if he thought they would make good settlers. And if he thought that they would make good settlers, then he would issue a little piece of paper telling them where to go, and then he would ask them to do their settlement duties, which was to clear, I think it was 5 acres of land in the first year and 10 in the second, and to do some work along the roadway, which eventually became the Talbot Road. And if they fulfilled their settlement duties, then they were allowed to pay a patent fee to Colonel Talbot and have that land registered in their name.
Yeah, I think the point I was starting out to make, and we had a hard time getting that picture on, was that Talbot had settled in an area that had no roads at all. And I think he realized that if he was going to attract settlers, he had to have some kind of a road policy. And that's when he hired Burwell and laid out the Talbot Road. And then did he not have a scheme that he persuaded the government that all the lots on the Talbot Road should be sold to settlers. In other words, no lots kept for the church, no lots kept for the government.
Yeah, clergy reserves, school reserves and clergy reserves were pushed back.
Well, that was fairly important, wasn't it, to his...
Well, I think it certainly was to opening up the country, and of course the Talbot Road was considered the best road in the whole of Upper Canada, and it went from Fort Erie to Detroit, and because of Colonel Talbot's settlement policies, it was the land was picked up there rather quickly.
Yeah, I've noticed in early land applications, 1809, 1810, 1811, they all say they're applying for a lot of land on the road leading to Port Talbot.
Yeah.
They want to settle there. And then they, at the bottom of that applications, they were probably all written out at Malahide, and they'll have at the bottom recommended by Thomas Talbot.
Something like that.
And then he put their name on a little map he had.
Yes, the maps actually are preserved in the Ontario Archives, and we have photostats of them in the Elgin County Pioneer Museum.
And now, some people, do you feel Talbot was fairly fair to the settlers?
I think he wanted a loyal British subject. He wanted to make this a stronghold of British sentiment, largely to counter what he thought, what everyone feared. We rather think about the Americans at the time as being rather like Iranians or wild men that would do almost anything, and republicanism was something new, and of course they weren't very far removed from the American Revolution. So that Talbot thought of the British tradition as very important. And United Empire Loyalists, of course, were welcome. But no one who didn't want to work on his own land and become part of the settlement. In other words, land speculators, which were so common in other parts of the country, were not tolerated by Colonel Talbot in the Talbot Settlement.
Yeah, he wasn't anxious to let some capitalist or entrepreneur pick up 500, 600, 700 acres at a settlement price and then sell it to someone else after doing a little work on it. Coyne, in his book,
his preface to the book about the Talbot papers, his collected papers, blames Colonel Talbot for the slow growth rate of the Albury and Dunwich townships in Elgin County because he held back a lot of the land for himself. In other words, he took his compensation for his efforts in land in Dunwich and Albury townships, and actually at the time of his in 1840, when the wild land tax was imposed on him, I think he had about 70 to 75,000 acres in his own name. And of course, at that time, when they put the wild land tax onto it, he had to start getting rid of it. That's probably why they did. So, in a way, he was the worst speculator of the lot, but he wouldn't let anyone else do any speculating. And I think that Coyne has a point, perhaps. Yeah, Coyne is one of the, Talbot has, Ermatinger defends him, he's a conservative, and Coyne, both the Coynes attack him a little bit, and of course they're reformers or liberals. Although I thought Fred Coyne Hamill is very fair to Talbot in Lake Erie Barren. Yes, well, he, of course, is of Coyne background, but I think he's essentially a modern historian without any axes to grind. He couldn't care less about it. He was just concerned with the facts as he saw them, and I think he did a very level, even job on portraying Colonel Talbot for what he actually